Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar held as part of the Victorian Building Authority's Practitioner Education Series. My name's Erna Lay, Team Leader, and I will be your host for today. Today's webinar, we will be covering the following specific topics that are relating to building permits, and they are protection works, public protection, mandatory inspections, and building appeals board. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people attending these sessions today. As Victoria's Building and Plumbing Regulator, the VBA is committed to ensuring a confident and thriving industries that collaborates with stakeholders to enhance practitioners' competency to deliver improved outcomes for the community. We have a role in ensuring practitioners understand how to do things correctly and in discouraging risky, harmful, or illegal behaviour in the building and plumbing industries. Unfortunately, Adam could not join us today. Christian Williams will be our presenter for this webinar. Christian is a senior technical advisor within the technical and regulations building teams, with more than 30 years experience in the building industry and 9 years working at the VBA. Christian has extensive knowledge, experience and qualifications in building constructions, building surveying and fire safety engineering. Now, before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this session is being recorded and the link to this presentation will be made available on the VBA website along with our previous webinars. If time permits, we will be answering some pre-submitted questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please still submit your questions via the Q&A function during the webinar, as the team is still available to answer your questions. At the end of the webinar, we will collate all the unanswered questions and will provide an answer to as many of these as possible. A copy of the Q&A will be sent out with your proof of attendance certificate in the following weeks. Also, during the webinar, we will be conducting live polls that will automatically appear on your screen. Please feel free to use the QR codes referenced on the slides to direct you to the relevant practice notes relating to the topic being presented today. Christian, I will now hand over to you.
Thank you, Erna, and welcome everybody. Thanks for the great introduction, Erna. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Christian Williams, and I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for the Technical and Regulation Building team here at the VBA. Today, the webinar is going to cover protection works, public protection. This includes serving of protection works notices, the roles and responsibilities, and public protection under Regulation 116. Mandatory inspections will include the requirements, the roles and responsibilities, and process for directions to fix. The Building Appeals Board part will cover the appeals process, disputes, modifications, and compliance assessments. After this webinar, you'll be able to have a better understanding of the requirements for protection work and public safety, have a better understanding of the requirements for mandatory inspections, and have a better understanding of your rights relating to the Building Appeals Board process. For the first part of this webinar, we'll focus on protection work under Regulation 111 and public protection under Regulation 116 of the Building Regulations 2018. Let's firstly start with protection work and what it is. Using some examples, we'll discuss the process for protection work. Again, the QR code on your screen provides a link to the specific practice notes relating to protection work. The first example we'll talk about is underpinning. This includes vertical and lateral supports, protection against variation in earth pressures, and other support for adjoining property. Then you also have shoring. This is the process of temporarily supporting a building, structure, or trench with shores and props. When in danger of collapse or during repairs or alterations, shoring needs to be provided. Shoring may be vertical, angled, or horizontal. It can also include other building work designed to maintain the stability of adjoining property. It could also take the form of a gantry or overhead protection, or another overhead barrier that prevents debris or material from falling off a roof or onto another part of the adjoining property. Let me further elaborate on the definition of what protection work is and why we need it. When an owner is entitled to carry out building work on their land, sometimes that work has the potential to cause damage to adjoining properties. And this must obviously be prevented. Fortunately, the Building Act 93 and Building Regulations 2018 provide a statutory process for the protection of adjoining property from the risk of significant damage due to the proposed building work. Regulation 111 of the Building Regulations 2018 requires the relevant building surveyor, when assessing an application for a building permit, to make a determination as to whether protection work is required to protect an adjoining property. This is when the property may be at risk from damage from the building work. It could be, for example, any of the following common scenarios. Where building work is proposed on or near a boundary which consists of excavations, site cuts, changes to foundations or footings, or demolition work. Another common scenario is when there are existing buildings, retaining walls, or structures near the boundary or on an adjoining property that could be affected. And lastly, where there's a risk of building materials or equipment falling over an adjoining property boundary due to the construction process and causing damage to that property. In addition, the Act provides that where there is a risk of significant damage, the adjoining owner must be consulted about the proposed building work and applicable precautions that will be undertaken to protect their property. Protection work is required if there is a likelihood of significant damage to the adjoining property, which could also include sheds, trees, driveways, and paving. Just on a side note, we'd also like to mention timber fences and protection work. Building work on boundaries could involve the demolition of walls, such as a garage wall, which may trigger the requirement for a new fence to be constructed between properties. Work may also involve the construction of new walls on boundaries, which requires the removal of an existing fence. Please be reminded that removal and replacement of a boundary fence may not be protection work, and these matters are subject to the Fences Act 1968. The process for owners and the forms that need to be completed are set out in the Fences Act, which is administered by the Department of Justice and Community Safety. Quite often or not, one may be faced with the question of trying to decide whether it is protection work or whether it's building work. Moreover, whether protection work can or needs to be done on the adjoining land or from the side of the property boundary where the building work is being carried out, or maybe both. Where protection work needs to be done on the adjoining property, Section 95 of the Building Act 93 sets out the process that allows access to the adjoining property to undertake the required protection work. A question often posed here relates to accessing the building site to use the adjoining property. For instance, building work may be designed in a way which requires access to an adjoining property in order to carry out the building work. For example, building materials may need to be lifted over the building site with a crane that must swing over adjoining property, or the preferred construction of masonry walls on boundaries are to be constructed or finished from the outside of the property boundary of the building site. Where the construction process requires access to the building site via an adjoining property, this is not protection work. It should be remembered the protection work process does not entitle an owner to freely access an adjoining property to undertake building work without consent. Access to an adjoining property to conduct building work must be arranged by agreement with the owner of the adjoining property. It is recommended that an owner discuss proposed building work with the adjoining owner and reach an agreement about any access that may be required before finalising their application for building permit. If a building permit is issued and access is required over or on the adjoining property and agreement was not reached, then the building design may need to be altered and a variation to the building work may be subsequently required, which could become quite costly. In addition, Section 95 of the Building Act provides the owner or the agent of owner with the ability to enter the adjoining owner's property to carry out a survey and any required protection work. Before entering the site, the adjoining owner must be given 24 hours notice, unless another time frame is agreed upon. Entry on the adjoining property for this purpose is available between the hours of 8 AM and 6 PM only. The right of entry to carry out protection work does not apply to entry for any other purpose, such as carrying out of building work. Entry for that purpose will require a separate agreement between the owner and or builder and the adjoining owner. We'll now move on to discuss the variety of roles and responsibilities involved in the protection work process for the relevant building surveyor or RBS, the owner of the property, and the adjoining owner. Let's first start with the RBS. To begin with, the RBS must decide whether the protection work is required. If it is required, the RBS issues a Form 6 determination. This form enables the RBS to document their decision and notify the owners that protection work is required as per Regulation 111, Sub-Regulation 4. During their assessment, the RBS will review the building work and must consider the following matters to see whether the protection work is adequate. Plans and specifications that show and or describe materials and methods to be used in the proposed building work, any demolition or excavation required, any proposed work that will affect party walls or retaining walls, the nature and likely extent of any damage or other adverse effect on the stability or otherwise of any adjoining property that may have damage caused by the proposed building work. A certificate from a registered endorsed engineer certifying the structural design of the building work, or any other matters the RBS may consider relevant. Once the RBS has carried out the assessment, protection work must be provided by the owner in relation to the adjoining property before and during the carrying out of building work that gave rise to the need for protection work. The RBS can, as part of the application for building permit or at any time during the construction phase when it becomes apparent that protection work is required, make a determination that protection work be provided to the adjoining property. Where the adjoining owner does not agree, but the RBS is satisfied that the protection work is appropriate, then the RBS must issue a determination using a Form 9. In the event of any subsequent dispute, the RBS must not act as an arbiter where there is a disagreement about proposed protection work. The RBS should instead refer the parties to the Building Appeals Board to resolve the dispute. Moving on to the owner, they need to provide adequate information to the RBS to consider the protection work. A VBA approved statement that explains the operation of protection work and dispute resolution process to the adjoining owner. Where protection work is required, the owner prepares the Form 7 notice. Essentially, this form enables owners to provide notice to adjoining property owners of the intention to carry out building work and the details of the proposed protection work being carried out to protect the adjoining property. The owner also provides a Form 8. This form enables the adjoining property owner to provide a response notice to the proposal for the protection work, in which they are provided the opportunity to agree, ask for more information, or to disagree with the proposed protection work. In addition, where the work relates to the construction or alteration of a building, a copy of the allotment site plan is also required to be provided. Let's talk about the Act and specifically Section 93, which applies to insurance, and Section 94, which applies to the survey requirements. Section 93 requires that the owner must arrange insurance that includes coverage for damages to adjoining property caused by the building work. The coverage must extend for 12 months after the building work is complete and must be for an amount agreed between the owner and adjoining owner, but in the absence of an agreement, a dispute may be lodged with the Building Appeals Board. Following on, Section 94 requires a survey of the adjoining property to be arranged before the protection work commences. This survey must be carried out in the presence of both the owner and the adjoining owner or their agents, and recorded in writing or by other means, and signed or otherwise acknowledged as an agreed record of the existing condition of the adjoining property. This is required for evidence to protect the interests of both parties in case damages are claimed down the track. Where the RBS determines that protection works are required and it is adjoining or required to be within a public area, it is prudent to check with the relevant council for any additional requirements and for any services or restrictions that may be located within these areas. This will help to avoid and alleviate any concerns regarding issues with, for example, installation of rock anchors and or extensive damages to services that often run under footpaths or roads. This could get presumably very expensive to fix, where some of these issues could easily be avoided by contacting council or using a dial before you dig or similar service. With respect to the service of documents for protection work, Section 236 of the Building Act specifies the methods for service of documents. Firstly, documents may be served by hand in person. They also may be served by post. Section 49 of the Interpretation of Legislation Act 1984 outlines the provisions related to the serving of documents by post. Documents may also be served by email. For this method to be valid, the consent of all parties involved is required, and the parties must be able to receive and view the documents in the format being served. This is required prior to the service of the email in accordance with the Electronic Transactions Act 2000. Moving on to the adjoining owner. Once the adjoining owner has received the documents from the owner, the adjoining owner needs to respond using the Form 8. This form allows them to either agree, disagree, or request further information about the proposed protection work. An adjoining owner who fails to respond in the given timeframe of 14 days is taken to have agreed to the proposed protection work. In addition, the adjoining owner also needs to agree and provides access to carry out the survey. The adjoining owner can request that costs and expenses necessarily incurred by the adjoining owner in assessing the proposed work be paid by the owner, but this amount must be agreed between the parties. Please note that council or other authorities can also be adjoining owner when protection work is required for a street, road, or public space. Okay, for now, anyone who enjoys a quiz, here are 3 questions that we've put together for you as a recap of the content so far. True or false, the relevant building surveyor is the right person to assess whether protection works notices are required. Who sends protection work notices? Is it the owner or the RBS? True or false, you are free to access the adjoining property without your neighbour's consent. We'll give you a minute to respond to the questions. Okay. Moving on. True or false, the relevant building surveyor is the right person to assess whether protection work notices are required. The answer was true, and we got 98% was correct. Very good result. Who sends a protection work notices? Is it the owner or the RBS? The answer was the owner, and 74% got it right. Not as good, but not too bad this time as well. True or false, you are free to access the adjoining property without your neighbour's consent. False was the answer, and 97% people got it correct. Overall, it was a pretty good response to the answers. Thanks very much for your participation. So just to repeat, it was true or false, the relevant building surveyor is the right person to assess whether the protection works notices are required. Answer was true. Question 2, who sends the protection works notices? Is it the owner or the RBS? Answer was owner. Question 3, true or false? You are free to access the adjoining property without your neighbour's consent. Answer was false. This part of the webinar provides an overview of the public protection requirements. Specifically, we will discuss what protection of the public is, when are precautions required, what are the relevant building surveyor's responsibilities, what documentation must be provided to the RBS. Again, the QR codes on your screen provide a link to the specific practice note relating to public protection. When there is a risk to the safety of the public property or public space, precautions must be taken before and during the carrying out of building work in accordance with Regulation 116 of the Building Regulations 2018. In relation to an application for a building permit, Regulation 29 allows the RBS to request the applicant to provide sufficient details of measures for the protection of the public. If the RBS determines that precautions to protect public safety are required, the precautions must be checked for adequacy by the RBS before building work is commenced. The builder must ensure that the RBS is notified upon reaching the mandatory notification stage when precautions required to protect the public have been completed. The RBS can then cause an inspection to occur. It should be noted that precautions must be appropriate for the type of building work proposed and its potential impact on public safety. For example, the construction process may at times require materials and equipment to be brought into the site to conduct the proposed building work, or material or equipment could potentially fall from the site into public spaces. Examples of these precautions may include parawebbing, chain mesh fencing, solid hoardings, scaffolding, or gantries. This slide provides some examples of situations where the RBS may determine that precautions must be taken before and during building work to protect public safety. Building facade works that may necessitate the use of scaffolding, gantries, hoardings, etc. Balconies which may require protection, such as parawebbing, chain mesh wire, edge protection, etc. Deep excavations or excavations adjoining public spaces that may require shoring, piles, hoardings, etc. Construction of retaining walls. Construction using large prefabricated building elements, such as concrete panels, which may require the use of cranes and or propping from outside the allotment boundary adjoining a public space. Or finally, demolition of a building requiring protection of public spaces from dust, debris, or use of equipment. So what are the responsibilities of the RBS? They must assess documentation in the building permit application and consider the extent of proposed building work and the associated risks to safety that the public may be exposed to as a result of that building work. Once the RBS determines that precautions are required, the applicant will need to provide details of the type and method of precautions proposed. The RBS must assess the proposed precautions under Reg 116 and, where required, confirm the adequacy of the precautions via an on-site inspection prior to the building work being undertaken. If the proposed precautions involve a projection beyond the street alignment, Regulation 116, Sub-Regulation 4, requires a report and consent from the council prior to issue of a building permit. Council will again assess the proposed precautions and conduct an inspection to determine their appropriateness. However, some councils may not offer a report and consent, but deal with precautions under a local law. If the proposed precautions comply with the local law, there is no need for a report and consent. However, the RBS must still assess and approve the precautions as part of the building permit process. In terms of the documentation required to be submitted to the RBS for approval, the minimum that should be provided, for example, are a site plan showing the subject allotment, adjoining properties, public space, access provisions for pedestrians, and/or traffic management plans. Elevations and sections, including any buildings, hoardings, gantries, etc. A hoarding plan with its location, the width of the street, and the remaining footpath shown. A work method statement that includes a breakdown of the stages of the work, timings for the precautions, and period of time that they will be in place. A services plan showing location of underground pipes, power lines, and gas mains. And where applicable, engineer's certification and design of any structural components. Okay, once again, we've reached quiz time. Here are 3 questions that we have put together as a recap of the content on public protection. Number 1, true or false? When there is a risk to the safety of the public due to construction work on a site, precautions must be in place to protect the public. True or false? Question number 2, who is the right person to check the adequacy of the proposed precautions, the RBS or the owner? Question number 3, true or false? Unless a local law requires precautions, the report and consent of the relevant council is not required for building over this street alignment. True or false? I'll give you another minute to answer those questions. Thank you. Question number 1, true or false? When there is a risk to the safety of the public due to the construction work on a site, precautions must be in place to protect the public. Answer was true, and 99% people got it right. 99% of people got it right. Well done, guys. Question number 2, who is the right person to check the adequacy of the proposed precautions, the RBS or the owner? The RBS was the right answer, and 96% got it right. Well done again. Question number 3, true or false? Unless a local law requires precautions, the report and consent of the relevant council is not required for precautions over the street alignment. Answer was true. No, hang on. Yes, it's false. Sorry, the answer. And 75% got it right, which was pretty well done too. Thanks for participating in that quiz, guys. I'll just run over that once more. True or false? When there is a risk to the safety of the public due to construction work on a site, precautions must be in place to protect the public. True or false? Answer was true. Question number 2. Who is the right person to check the adequacy of the proposed precautions? The RBS or the owner? Answer was RBS. Question number 3. True or false? Unless a local law requires precautions, the report and consent of the relevant council is not required for precautions over the street alignment. And answer was true. Did I say false before? Did I? Oh, I made a mistake about that. Sorry. The next part of the webinar covers the requirement for mandatory inspections of building work. Beginning with inspections, these occur at certain prescribed mandatory notification stages of the building work, and the inspections for these stages provide an opportunity to confirm that building work has been constructed in accordance with the building permit before further work can continue. This is critical in ensuring that structural safety, amenity, and compliance requirements are achieved. During the building permit assessment, the RBS will determine the applicable prescribed mandatory notification stages, and these apply to the following types of building work. 1. Construction of a new building or alteration of an existing building under Regulation 167. It should be noted here that under Regulation 170, the RBS has a concession to be able to omit a mandatory notification stage that's set out in Regulation 167 if that stage is not relevant to the proposed building work. The other types of work are demolition or removal of a building under Regulation 168 and the construction of a swimming pool or spa under Regulation 169. Please note that inspections must occur at certain prescribed mandatory notification stages of building work in accordance with the regulations or as defined by the RBS in accordance with Section 35 of the Building Act. The builder must notify the RBS when a prescribed stage is reached. It is important to remember that the RBS must cause the inspection and improve the inspection. The builder must ensure that the work stops on completion of a mandatory notification stage where directed to do so by the RBS. Now let us move on to what the prescribed notification stages are for the construction of a new building or alterations to an existing building under Regulation 167. Those stages are before placing a footing, before pouring an in situ reinforced concrete member, the completion of framework, the inspection of fire and smoke resisting building elements as required under Regulation 172, and then the final on completion of all building work. It must be noted that Regulation 172 requires additional mandatory inspections in each story of a Class 2, 3 or Class 4 part of a building for any building element that is of lightweight construction required to resist the spread of fire in at least one sole occupancy unit. Checking of each stair shaft, lift shaft, or service shaft of lightweight construction required to resist the spread of fire. And the components and junctions of these building elements I just mentioned. And lastly, Regulation 172, Sub-Regulation 2, also requires a mandatory inspection for one of each type of fire protection method for each type of service penetration that is required to resist the spread of fire or smoke on each story of a Class 2, 3, 4 part, 9A or 9C building. To continue on with the prescribed mandatory notification stages, the next stage is for the demolition and removal of a building under Regulation 168, which are on completion of precautions for public protection that we mentioned earlier under Regulation 116, and the precautions in accordance with Australian Standard AS 2601, the demolition of structures, under Regulation 117. Then a final inspection upon completion of all demolition or removal work. And lastly, the prescribed mandatory notification stages for the construction of a swimming pool or spa under Regulation 169 are completion of the excavation for swimming pool or spa before pouring any footing or in situ reinforced concrete member that is specified in the relevant building permit by the RBS, the completion of any precautions for public protection under Regulation 116, such as a temporary swimming pool barrier, and then the final on completion of the swimming pool or spa and related safety barrier. If a building permit incorporates multiple types of building work, for instance, the construction of a swimming pool, retaining walls, dwelling, demolition, and construction of a new garage, the building permit must list the different types of work and specify each of the specific mandatory notification stages for each type of work that are applicable. Now let's move on to discuss the differing roles and responsibilities for these building practitioners during the mandatory inspection process. Firstly, starting with the RBS, their role is to maintain building safety standards, ensuring that mandatory inspections are carried out in accordance with the legislation. Section 35 of the Building Act provides a general power for an RBS to cause an inspection of the building work at any time, whether a mandatory stage has been completed or not. Accordingly, when assessing a building permit application, the RBS should consider whether any inspections should occur in addition to the prescribed mandatory notification stages. An RBS may carry out the inspection themselves, or they may cause a person specified under Section 35B of the Act to inspect on their behalf. The RBS must not cause another person to carry out inspections unless that person is a registered building surveyor or registered inspector and authorised under that registration to carry out the particular inspection, or a prescribed person to carry out a prescribed class of inspection in accordance with Regulation 174. In addition, the RBS must also ensure that all inspections at mandatory notification stages are carried out in person, and they cannot conduct the mandatory inspection relying only on photographs, drones, videos, declarations, or reports. Where the building work being inspected is complex, the RBS can cause multiple persons to inspect the building work. For example, as the same mandatory inspection, a registered fire safety engineer may inspect fire and smoke resisting elements, and a building inspector registered in an appropriate category may inspect other aspects of the building work. If it is proposed that a person other than the RBS inspect the building work at a mandatory notification stage, for example, an endorsed building engineer, the RBS must still be notified at the mandatory notification stage and then cause that person to carry out the inspection. The builder or owner must not cause the inspection to occur. Pursuant to Section 35A of the Act, the RBS must also ensure a record of inspection is available and contains the prescribed information specified in Regulation 173 for all inspections carried out under Section 34 or Section 35 of the Act. It is common practice where an RBS engages a person to inspect on their behalf that they use the person's inspection report and certificate of compliance for building work under Regulation 126 as the record of inspection. This practice is permissible under the Act. However, the RBS must still ensure that a record of inspection is made, which contains the prescribed information under Regulation 173. This means that if the person's inspection report does not contain all the required information under Regulation 173, the RBS either must make a compliant record of inspection or request the person's inspection report to include the missing information. It is also important to note that the RBS can only rely on a Regulation 126 certificate for building work for the prescribed classes of building work specified under Regulation 123, which only applies to domestic building work. For commercial building work, the certificate would be more akin to an inspection report. Therefore, the RBS could only rely upon this certificate if it was for domestic building work and get immunity under Section 128 of the Act. If non-compliant building work is identified after an inspection, the direction to fix process must be undertaken. If the non-compliances are resolved in the direction to fix process, the RBS should then make a record of inspection with the outcome being that the mandatory inspection stage has been approved and that the building work is compliant. This is important as the record of inspection then leaves no doubt as to whether or not the non-compliances have been resolved. If the builder fails to comply with the written direction to fix, the RBS must then make a record of inspection with the outcome being that the mandatory inspection stage has not been approved, and the RBS must then include the details of the non-compliant building work. Furthermore, in order to ensure compliance here, the RBS determines that in the circumstances it would be appropriate to issue a direction to fix, they may proceed directly to the building notice and order enforcement process under, They may proceed directly to the building notice and order enforcement process under Part 8 of the Act. Moving on to the requirements for a building inspector. Persons who may carry out an inspection of building work on behalf of the RBS are set out in Section 35B. This person must either be an appropriately registered building surveyor, building inspector, or prescribed person pursuant to Regulation 174 of the regulations, such as an endorsed civil, mechanical, electrical, or fire engineer. It's an offence for a person to carry out work as an inspector if they are not appropriately registered and authorised to carry out that work. The inspector can only be engaged by the RBS for the purposes of causing a mandatory inspection and must act on behalf of the RBS under their direction. The inspector must not approve variations to the building permit or approve works that do not comply with the Act, regulations, and building permit. During construction, the builder named on the building permit after completion of each mandatory notification stage must ensure that the RBS is notified that the stage is ready for inspection. Once the notification is given to the RBS, the builder must ensure that no further building work occurs if they're directed to do so by the RBS. Where the RBS does not direct the builder to stop work, the builder must not allow the building work to be inspected or to be covered until the work has been inspected and approved. Section 33, subsection 3, requires that where the RBS becomes aware that they have not been notified at the completion of a mandatory notification stage, or that the builder has not ensured that the building work has stopped at a mandatory notification stage, where they have been directed to do so, the RBS must notify the VBA. Failure to notify the RBS of when a mandatory inspection is ready to be inspected is an offence under section 33, subsection 1 of the Act. Any notification made to the RBS proposing a prescribed person other than the RBS to undertake a mandatory inspection must be formally made to the RBS, who can then cause the work to be inspected by the other person. For example, an engineer who's consented to inspecting the footings. Next, we will discuss directions to fix. The process for issuing a direction to fix is outlined on the current slide. A direction to fix is given to the builder when a non-compliance is found in an inspection following a notification of completion of one of the mandatory notification stages. Typically, the direction to fix process will require the builder to carry out work so that the building work is brought into compliance with the Act, the regulations, and/or the building permit. A direction to fix can be oral, which is a spoken direction to the builder, providing the builder 7 days to comply with the direction before a written direction must be given. It is recommended that an oral direction to fix process be given initially if it is considered reasonable that compliance could be achieved in the 7-day timeframe. The builder should be advised of the timeframe when giving direction to fix. An oral direction to fix can be given by the RBS or a registered building inspector who is carrying out an inspection on behalf of the RBS. However, it may not always be appropriate to give an oral direction to fix. A written direction to fix can be given without an oral direction being given first. When a written direction to fix is given, a copy of it must also be provided to the owner to ensure they're aware of the items that do not comply. Under certain circumstances, the builder may ask the RBS for an extension before the end of the specified period for compliance with the direction, and the RBS may grant the extension if he considers it appropriate to do so. If an extension of time is granted, the RBS must give written notice specifying the period of extension to the builder with a copy provided to the owner. A builder who has been given a written direction to fix may appeal to the Building Appeals Board under section 138A of the Building Act, but this appeal must be made within 7 days of the written direction to fix being given in accordance with Regulation 271, Sub-Regulation 1H of the Building Regulations 2018. Okay, it's quiz time again. Here's another 3 questions that we've put together for you as a recap of the content so far.
We're actually going to move past the poll questions in the interest of time, so they are provided on the slides and we will supply them to everyone on our website.
I'll read through it, thank you. So question 1, who causes an inspection? Is it the relevant building surveyor or the builder? The answer is the RBS. Question 2, true or false? During construction, the builder named on the building permit after completion of each mandatory notification stage must ensure that the RBS is notified that the stage is ready for inspection. Answer is true. Question 3, true or false? A copy of the written direction to fix is given to the owner. True.
As we only have less than 5 minutes left, I think we might now move to the Q&A slide. All of the Building Appeals Board content is going to be available to everyone after the presentation. So we just perhaps skip to those Q&As.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian, for that. I apologise in advance that we've run out of time and we want to really do the pre-submitted Q&A questions with you guys. I'll just wait till Christian catches up. So I guess we'll go straight to the questions. Christian, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So with one of the pre-submitted questions was, if a Building Appeals Board application is made, should the RBS have their say beforehand?
The relevant building surveyor who was issuing the building permit really should not be assisting the owner that is subject to the building permit in preparing a BOB application. The BOB application is to be done by the owner and their agent, or their agent, and the adjoining owner or their agent. The board could then consider if they require any input from the RBS before or during the hearing.
Okay. What can we do if an owner of the adjoining property keeps refusing to approve the protection notice being served?
Yeah, look, there's not much you can do other than it is up to the RBS to make their determination once the adjoining owners provided the refusal using the Form 9. Yep. However, the owner or the adjoining owner still have a right to appeal that determination of the RBS, so they can take that to the Building Appeals Board if they feel that that's necessary.
Okay. Another question was, where a non-compliance is identified on site that relates to a matter that would ordinarily require a report and consent, for instance, fire services, projection, wall height on boundary, after a building notice has been served, what is the role of the reporting authority in resolving the matter?
Okay, thanks, Anna. Firstly, report and consent is required to be obtained prior to the issue of a building permit. And if one was not obtained in this scenario during the application for building permit and the permit was issued, then the relevant reporting authority has no role in resolving the matter. The non-compliance will need to be rectified as part of the enforcement process, but where the matter is not resolved, the RBS will have to continue with the enforcement process. It's possible for the owner to lodge an appeal with the Building Appeals Board against the issue of the building notice, or they could also apply for a modification to the building regulations to show cause to that building notice.
Okay. With 1 minute left, that's all we have time for today. Thanks so much, Christian, for answering the questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you've enjoyed the session. If we didn't manage to answer your questions, we will endeavour to do so in the upcoming weeks, and we'll get back to you guys. Thank you so much, and we do apologise that we've sort of gone a bit over time and haven't covered Building Appeals Board, but again, the slides will be on our website. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.